if you truly want the ability to transact with anybody in the world, you need to rely upon a system that has some level of guarantees, some level of assurance that you are actually trading assets and you're moving. And that's the fundamental function of blockchain, right? Ability for you to be able to drive some of those elements that does it. So smart contracts essentially provides programmability. So if you look at, how many of you heard of the term TVLs? TLV, sorry. Total locked value, right? This is basically people staking their, so this is a common term in liquidity pools. So all the CAs in the room, you have all these new financial terms. And also interesting, you guys are CAs, but in early days, 2012, 2014, 2015, I used to go to these meetups, and some of the New York law firms used to hold these meetups, and you'll find two categories of people. People who are in suits, and people who are in hoodies. And you know exactly who's a developer and who's a lawyer. And those are the two categories, and we would get nothing done. Because lawyers would say, hey, how can you do all these? And we are trying to say, no one cares about your rule of law, because we are trying to codify that rule regulation into smart contract. So all the CAs in the room, we have something called, the notion of collateralization is not new. We provide collateral, we provide guarantees, and all TVLs, or total locked value, or TLV, sorry, total locked value allows you to be able to lock these into a smart contract, and you only release based on an event. So if, for example, and I'm going to, Tushar. Okay, so when Tushar comes to me and says, hey, here's my Ether, I need some rupee or dollar, you can basically lock that Ether into a smart contract. Then I issue something called USDC, which is a stable coin, and we'll dive more into what they are tomorrow. And that stable coin becomes your equivalent of cash. Now, what I'm expecting for you is to repay the cash with interest if you want to Ether back. Well, in traditional world, you're going to a bank and bank's keeping your paper and having you sign all these contracts. In smart contract world, you simply push your Ether to a smart contract address. It gets locked here, and somebody who's a liquidity provider sends you a stable coin in your wallet. Suddenly you have USDC. You still have a claim on the asset under certain conditions that if you were to return the dollar or fiat currency, then it releases your Ether and it comes back to you. So remember, we removed all the intermediaries. There's no more 5, 6, 7 parties involved, because in this transaction today, if you were to do it, there'll be at least 3 or 4 parties involved. One be your guarantor, other will be liquidity provider guarantor, even though you may be going to one bank, but there are 4 people involved behind the scenes, and they all want a cut of the transaction.
So regarding smart contract, now I believe in future lawyers will also have to be well versed with these kind of things. Because when there is rule of law, and contract is again, if suppose it has to be valid in eyes of law, then it has to take care of the regulations. Now, in general or in nowadays, the contract is worth this much, like 100 pages, 50 pages, 40 pages.
Yeah.
So these smart contracts.
Brilliant, yeah.
So how would normal people will understand the nuances, what are the terms used, and how it will mitigate those risks which the normal party
the compromise.
Like Facebook is there, when they give so many conditions, or the app gives so many conditions, and we just say okay, agree.
Yeah.
We don't know what is inside.
Yeah.
So, but how these things will mitigate that risk?
Yeah. So one thing, you can't mitigate the stupid risk. Yeah. The accountability is, at the end of the day, it's on us to do all these things, and the law or the regulation basically tries to make it easier. So in many countries, laws, you cannot have 15 pages. You have simple terms that people can understand behind the scenes. I worked on a project in 2016. How many are familiar with private equity? Okay, so you understand private equities, right? Basically, these are GPs, LPs coming together, putting money. So for many of you who don't know, basically, I have 2 ways to raise money. I can go to a bank and ask them to raise money with all these amazing terms and crazy paperwork, or I can just go and ask the 5 rich guys and say, hey, I'm doing this, building a road in Udyog Vihar, can you fund this? And they say, fine, we'll fund it, but this is the terms, there's a risk. And I'll take the money from 5 people and I create, so basically that structure of what they call a special purpose vehicle is a legal structure, it's a legal entity. All the entity does is allows you to lock your money and say, I'm using this money to build a road and I'm going to charge a toll, and that toll is going to pay back the loan over time. But that paperwork is at least in the US, for every private equity, it takes about $2 million to verify because you have lawyers who look at every word and everything else. Even if you change a date on that paperwork, it has to go back to legal review. So we built a private equity marketplace for Northern Trust, which is the largest private equity marketplace in the world, private equity fund admin for the world. And the idea was exactly that can we codify this into a smart contract once? So you pay the legal fee once. And if all you're doing is changing some dates and terms, you're only verifying the delta, the change, and you're taking away the legal cost, which is 2 million plus every single time that happens there, right? And so I think for many of you who ask for use cases, that's one of the use cases, which is one thing blockchain does really, really well are 2 V's. Anybody who wants to give it a shot? Blockchain does these things very, very well. Verification and anybody else? Starts with a V.
Trail.
Validation. Yeah, trail is validation. You have the provenance of that. Is validation. So the entire community that's reliant upon verification validation of systems, blockchain does it implicitly. You move a transaction, we know exactly from to what happened between where smart contract, and that's why none of the financial crimes in blockchain world has not been caught. In fact, they're faster. So in financial world, of course, the crime it sometimes takes 10 years to be caught because there's all kinds of investigation. You have SWIFT network, you have ACH, you have payment systems that you all have to connect the dots. And sometimes that takes a long time. In blockchain world, because of verification validation, you know exactly who has the wallet. You can triangulate the wallet with IP addresses, and that gives you a function to say, we know where the crime is coming from, and that's why pretty much all crimes are instantly caught, or it's a matter of a few days, which 55% of financial crimes goes uncaught, even today, in spite of having all the tech, because of the fact that they don't want to pursue it because there's just too much work involved in doing those things. That's use of AI as well, is ability for me to catch financial crimes from that perspective. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and one more thing is very famous, whenever there is a rule of law, new amendment is there.
That's right, there's always someone there to circumvent it.
Has there been any instance like where these things have been compromised?
Yeah, they have, and all in the legal way too. So for example, these smart contracts, right? At the end of the day, they're neither smart nor contracts. There is some human, like Rohan, who's writing the smart contracts. Now Rohan may miss a few things or have a, so there was the very first vulnerability we saw with Ethereum was $55 million that was drained. So all they did was the smart contract had the avenue to say that here's a pool of funds that people can put money into a DAO. What this contract allows you to create a sub-DAO. Sub-DAO basically says, if I have $1 million in this DAO, I can put in 20,000 here, 20,000 there. So they created a sub-DAO, and they were able to drain fund. Hey, what's your name? Karan. What do you want to know? I'm just joking. Come on in, Karan. I'm just kidding. So they were able to drain. I'll get your names a bit later. I was just doing the expectation exercise in terms of what everybody wants to get. So when we have a short break, just write your name and what you want to get out of this next 8 hours in your case from that. So they were able to drain the fund from a DAO to create a sub-DAO and move the money. So it is all illegal because the smart contract allowed you to do it. And if the ethos of the blockchain world depends upon the fact that you're reliant upon the code of law, the code is law, then that was questioned, and the community said, hey, including me, to say you messed up. So right or wrong is not up to that for the community to decide because the code allowed you to do it. Second thing, I think another example in the real world, in our world, is Citibank. How many of you heard of the $1 billion snafu? This is a fat finger problem. Some guy just transferred $1 billion instead of $1 million. Just a few zeros here and there. And the money got transferred in the real world. This is going through SWIFT and ACH and all these different systems. And it was settled. It took T+1 or T+2. And the guy said, hey, we made a mistake. We sent 900 million more than what we should have sent. And the court said there's something called transaction finality, which means once I move money to your account, it's final. No one can just go to your account and draw money from there. So the court ruled against them. So now you have to simply be at the mercy of the other party to give your money back. Some people did, and some people said, no, we'll keep it. Some banks. So they were all they were all banks, essentially, not individuals, right? So that's a real world problem. So you look at the analog, right? So you have the Citibank who made a mistake, a fat finger mistake, and here was a code which is meant to be law in this digital ecosystem. And so now, which I would have covered this in Reg and Comp, but we're not doing Reg and Comp, but I'll give you a perspective. You should look into CRC, is Crypto Rating Council. And Crypto Rating Council basically requires all the exchanges now, including WazirX and DCX in India, if you want to list a token or a DAO, they require you to go through an entity which allows you to be able to go and verify this, the smart contract verification validation of smart contract to make sure that you don't have technical holes and you don't have the right economic systems. So not a single entity or a group of people are taking advantage of this system, per se. CRC, Crypto Rating Council. It's from the early days of all the exchanges, mostly in the US, like Coinbase and Huobi and 0x and some of these guys who said, there's no regulation right now. So you don't know, a token is a token is a token, right? So if I give you a USDC, which is a payment instrument, and I give you a synthetic security, which is a tokenized version of Tesla, and I give you Bitcoin, the mechanism of how they show up in the are exactly the same. They all are tokens. So how do you discern between what is a security and what is a payment instrument, what is a debt instrument? Because there's a law that deals with these different types separately. And that's why India does not and will not allow crypto for payments. So this is the big confusion that most people have is they're taxing crypto. That implies certain level of legality. Crypto is not illegal, regardless of what you hear. The only thing that India will not allow, and 90% of countries in the world, in fact, most countries will not allow crypto for payments. Something called CTF, counterterrorism financing, which we should know more about here than most countries. People can misuse it. If you start paying for things with crypto, then exactly what people do with cash. That's why you had demonetization. One of the premise of demonetization here was exactly that.
So these results basically signify as to why crypto can never replace real currency.
Well, not exactly. Because remember, it's a belief system. Any token, any currency is a belief system. So for example, I did some experiments. And I continue to do those experiments. I went and long time back bought a house with crypto, right? And it was interesting because the banking system, the closing that happens, there are 6-7 parties involved when you buy a house. And they ask you where the money's come from. And you cannot pay money in cash in the US. It has to go through a bank. So they removed the whole black money problem for that. It has to go through a system and it has to be done by a check and everything else. So the question became is, where do you get the money from? And you mentioned Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a bad word those days. And they just completely mark you as a criminal the moment you mention Bitcoin. So I had to go through an exchange, liquidate the assets, move to a bank, tell them that I have a bona fide job and but the system didn't know I'm doing it with Bitcoin. So I had to circumvent that whole system around it. But your question was basically is that if tomorrow you're selling a house and I'm selling a house, or I'm buying a house, peer-to-peer, which is the fundamental premise of blockchain, can they prevent it? Can you simply, so you have gift, you can gift your house, you can gift your car. Can you circumvent the problem? Gift me the house and I transfer Bitcoin to you. That is a payment. It's a peer-to-peer transfer, but it is in lieu of exchange of an asset. So the question then becomes, is while the official system, the payment system, the point of sale systems, the NFTS, RTGS, the IMPLS, all the system that India has, that may not never allow crypto, but nothing is preventing you from having a wallet and me having a wallet on Bitcoin network and exchanging assets.
Exactly, sir. For the government, that's a problem because
yes.
the government won't be able to collect taxes.
Yes, that is a problem. And I think most of my work with the government is, instead of fighting that, you cannot turn off the internet. So you simply cannot. Even North Korea cannot turn off internet. Right? That's the primary source of income for those guys. But the thing is that in many cases, you cannot turn the internet off. So we are saying don't fight it, understand it. Have the tools and have the mechanism in place, having monitoring, using AI and machine learning in understanding the element of wallets, where do they reside, how can I go and prosecute some of these entities and so on and so forth. That's a better option than going after. So payment, again, as we're going through this tokenized element, it's easy, it's fast, it's got fractional ownership, you can have audit trails. These are the strength of the system, it empowers us, but it can also be used by the regulators to understand better, only because you have all the things that we appreciate about blockchain technology in general. Okay, part 2. So any questions so far? Are we clear? Makes sense? Using your time wisely. Okay.
So the lending protocol that you discussed, was that the Aave protocol?
You're Akshat, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You're Akshat.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, so this is one of those. So you have many lending protocol. Aave is one of those. So you have most common, so Aave used to be called Lend. They made Aave. But you have something called lending protocols, and you have something called AMMs, which is automated market makers. So automated market makers is basically a protocol where, so lending just does what the name signifies, lending, but AMMs provide liquidity to the market. So they become market makers. So they say, you know what, I see a market for these assets. I'm going to buy this from you, or you can stake it with me, or you can lend it to me. I'll lend it to somebody else, and I'm going to make the arbitrage in between this whole element. But yes, Aave is one of those, one of many. You have 1inch now, which is an aggregator, which is doing all of these above and more in that space. But Aave is one of the big ones, for sure.